welcome the resource person for today's session, Dr. Jyoti Bawane, madam. Good afternoon, madam. Good afternoon, all the participants. Actually, when I was going through her biodata, it was really difficult what to mention and what not to mention, because everything, whatever, all her achievements have been so significant. I would like to mention a few of them over here. Dr. Jyoti, madam, is Associate Professor at the Center for Educational Studies, Indian Institute of Education. She has done her PhD in education, MSc in psychology, PG diploma in educational and vocational guidance, MEd in educational technology, BEd in physics and chemistry, and BSc in physics. To her credentials, some of them I would like to mention over here. Erasmus Mundus Scholarship to Belgium. She is a gold medalist she received a Best Paper Award in 2011 for her paper How and Why of Online Education, Perceptions of First Generation Learner in India at an international conference which was conducted by Symbiosis. Then she was also nominated for Dr. Ravindra Dave Award. She has also received Best Research Paper Award in 2010, and the topic was Online Education Mode to Promote Learner Autonomy. This was a state level seminar. She's received a UGC Fellow, awarded National Scholarship for PhD. She has been also guiding MPhil and PhD students. Under her, 11 students have been awarded MPhil and 2 are still pursuing right now. And 9 students have been awarded PhD. 3 of them are currently pursuing. She has a number of publication and books to her name. Some of them I would like to mention it over here. She has co-editor of a book on the Imbecile's Guide to Public Philosophy. Some of the books that I would like to mention is Ashram Schools, Teacher Context and Challenges, Education and Poverty, a Critical Analysis, and Theory and Praxis, Reflections on Colonization of Knowledge. She has number of chapters and articles, also an edited number of books. She has research publications to her name. They go beyond actually 20 to 25. She has done certain books reviews also. She has been a great contributor for the development of national reports that I would like to mention it over here. One of the report was monitoring framework and toolkit for ODL programs. This was for National Council for Teacher Education. She has contributed as a member in the development of report of the committee to prepare a policy for monitoring for ODL courses. Also, she has contributed as a member in development of report of the joint review mission on the centrally sponsored scheme of teacher education. Her experience includes 17 years teaching experience for MPhil students. She has been also quite associated with exchange programs and has assisted Dr. Tristan Johnson in the United States. She has been active in online teaching YCMOU, as well as EBEd program, which was also offered by YCMOU. She has also developed a lot of reports, and her e-learning curriculum also, the list is very vast and extensive. I would like to mention here that I was fortunate to be one of her students for one of her programs, and it was really interesting to be her student and learn from her. So I would like to stop the introduction here. I'm sorry, madam, I won't be able to read everything right now, but welcome to the session, and I would like to hand over this session to you.
Welcome. Thank you, Saili. It's been an honor to address the students, international students who are associated with the Bahai Academy, and also a program affiliated to the Savitribai Phule Pune University. I would like to thank the head of the education SPPU, that's the department, Professor Plane, the dean, Professor Sonamne, and also Dr. Lesan Azadi for inviting me to share my insights on the topic on tools used for data collection. Okay, I'll just like to share my screen. Yeah, I think, is my screen ever visible?
Yes, madam, the screen is visible.
Okay, fine. So the 1 sec, let me just reduce the, okay. It's about basically about data collection tools, and since it's the fourth day of this particular workshop, a lot of people, a lot of you must have got an idea about what is research, what kind of research can be taken, what are the different methods. So a lot of inputs has been given. Now we will go further. Like, it's basically, today's session is like, when you're trying to conduct research and when you want to get into the field, how do you approach the field and what kind of tools can you use when you go to the collect the data. So I would like what do you mean by data? Feature or particulars of any subject, or it could be about an issue, or it could be about an phenomena, or maybe in terms of numbers, or in terms of text, whatever it could be. But however, you should also know that when I said field, it largely means data. So keen to study what has happened in the past. So you also go back, data need not be only the current data, it could also be a past data. The very important thing is these data can be derived from various sources. So that's I think an advantage for us as human beings and in the field of social sciences, that we have many sources to collect the data. I would like the participants to, let me just, okay, right now, to go to this link. It's just a 3-item questionnaire. Quickly fill up that link, and then we will come back to the presentation. We will post the link on the chat box. And I forgot to say, maybe you should keep your Gmail open for this, because it is need not, but then most likely you can directly go and fill in the questionnaire. If I give you 2-3 minutes to fill, Siley, could you please paste the link, only the first link?
Yes, madam, I'll just do that. Yes, madam, this is the first link.
Okay.
It's come in the mail.
You post. Yeah, just click on the link. It's basically a very, it's a very crude kind of a questionnaire, just to see what is the kind of ICT usage the participants are currently using to access this particular program. But this exercise actually has some relevance to what we are going to hear today, what I'm going to share to you, or maybe associated to the kind of insights that I'm going to share. How can you relate to whatever I'm trying to say? So I will give a couple of minutes. It's quickly you can do it. Maybe as you do, just put a done, so that I will come to know, and then we will go ahead with the presentation. Yeah, in case there is, we will hardly, maybe we'll give a couple of 1 or 2 minutes, and then yes, I can see done coming. Okay, good. So yeah, it's actually a kind of a tool that I have developed on the Google Forms. Most of you must be aware of it. It's a tool actually to develop questionnaires, online questionnaires. So you can see that is also a part. So you can also see what how it feels to fill up an online questionnaire that which I will just share to you. It could many times it's more easier to fill in an online questionnaire than when you give something by hand. Okay, shall we go ahead? So now I'll go ahead to my presentation here. Yeah, looks like quite a number have done. Yeah, okay. We'll go to the next. If you see the tool that you have just now filled in, if you actually see, I have not got your details on your data, that's the name and gender. But if you see the data that tool actually generates is something like this. So you can see that this is a very raw data. It's a very crude data. You can just see that it's independent data, independent to the respondent. So when you actually have a glance at the data, you don't get much meaning about this data. So this is a very raw data. So raw data does not share any meaning to you, nor does it give any, you can't interpret raw data. So that is what happens. The next step generally when you collect raw data is so raw data, if you have to get meaning, in what forms do they generally can be generated? If you generally look at, see this is not the same data if you see, but actually if you see this, the whole data which you say raw form you saw, which is actually meaningless, and actually it is put in a form, in a presented form, it shares a lot of information, it gives a lot of information, and you can see that the raw data, whatever you collect in the field actually can represent, when it's represented as figures, it gives you immediately the information. So basically a data is converted to information. When it is processed, it actually becomes information. If you look in the flow chart also, in the bar chart, you see that, okay, you can see, okay, which country has given more of funds. I know it's not very clear, but I'm just telling what that particular chart is about. It's basically about the recent epidemic, which are the countries which have got donor, which are the countries. So you can see immediately the lines, you can see which are the countries. And the next small slide is on the number of migrant workers, and you can see how it has increased across years. So this is a kind of how data becomes very meaningful, and that's how it plays a very important role while you're conducting your research. So what I was speaking about, if you look at the, before I gave you the exercise, there's a lot of sources of data collection. And when you look at the sources of data collection, there generally they say that, okay, when I say first hand, you go to correct to the field. So you're directly in touch with the respondent, you're interacting with the respondent. So the data is a first hand source. So such kind of data where, you know, you're getting first hand information, you collecting data from a first respondent himself, it's called a primary data source. But whereas when I also spoke to you something about historical research, where you're looking back to already studies or reports or articles published by earlier researchers or earlier experts, then that's already a processed data. So you're having already a processed data which has been interpreted, concluded, and maybe recommendations have given. That kind of a data, when you're trying to refer to, is called as a secondary data source. So this primary you should know. But remember, when I say that if you're going to the field, it doesn't mean that you do not use secondary source, because ultimately when if you, as you must have been known, that there is a process before you approach the field that is called something called review of related literature, where you try to look back and to the kinds of past researches that have been undergone in the area what you're trying to investigate. So that's where the whole the role of a secondary source data becomes very prominent, where you're trying to look back into the earlier researchers. You're trying to see whether the study what you're trying to undertake is actually new, is it not a replication of the earlier studies. Primary data. What ways are it? I mean, can you collect primary data? You can see, you can. It's very common is you administer a questionnaire and you collect data from the respondents, or you administer a test. It could be if it's a teacher, if a researcher who's trying to assess the knowledge of a student or the performance of a student in a particular subject, or is trying to measure an psychological attribute, something like self-concept or something like creativity, or you're trying to measure an attitude, then you administer a test. Or as I did just now, an exercise, a very small exercise, you can also conduct an online survey, maybe something about what is the teacher's reaction towards a epidemic. That is a whole, when you do an online, it's easier to do. Of course, you can also go person to person and do survey. It's also possible. Face-to-face surveys are also conducted. You are aware of it. Something like the census, of course, it's not a research, but it is basically a purely survey where face-to-face data has been collected through face-to-face contact. You can also conduct an interview, maybe to more in detail about someone's experience while developing a particular program, or while it could also be his opinion about a particular scheme implemented by the government. It could be an education official. So that is an interview. Or you can also, other very important thing apart from the first four which I've said is observation. You can also observe the subject in a real life context. Although observation, when we say real life context, when you do an experimental study where you control the subject, of course, there lab, because this kind of in science, the experimental methods are largely adopted, and we have tried to even use to some extent in the social science, especially something maybe in a classroom situation where you try to control the surveys. That could be PhDs, it could be research publications, or it could be even surveys conducted. Most of us, if you know, if you're in social science, most of us rely on the census data. No, you will go back to census to find out, okay, what is the population, what is the percentage of this particular section of people in this particular state or in this particular district. So it becomes very important, because these are surveys which are processed and put up in percentages. That's also there. Reports, published reports, and it's all an activity of your literature. And also past researchers, we go back to see what do the earlier studies have to say, conveyed about the kind of study that I am trying to investigate. There are national archives, and also there are experimental conducted where, and the reports that are published because of those experiments. Now, prior to data collection, the whole, since we're speaking about data collection, we're speaking about sources, we're speaking about what kind of, how do you go about, what are different ways of collecting primary data or secondary data. I think it's very important for a researcher or an investigator, especially in social science, is to know what is your purpose of data collection. For that, I think you need to go back to your objectives of your study or the kind of research that you intend to undertake. That's whom are you trying to obtain the data from, because it's very important that you approach the right respondent and other respondents available. That's also very important, and that's something you will they give me the data that I want. That's also something which you need, because it also forms part of ethics of a data. You have to be very careful while doing research. Is ethics, how do you ask data from people? Is it appropriate to ask a particular kind of data? Do you think that it is not very sensitive, that the respondent will not respond? Whom do I approach? Do you think it's better to approach children above 7 years than the lower age children? So that's something you, it also depends, as a researcher, it's very important to see even your personal attributes, like whom are you comfortable with when you're planning your research. Someone asked me, would you like to approach teachers or headmasters, or would you like to approach children? That orientation also maybe you need to look into, and then look into the kind of investigation you want to proceed ahead. You also see if your research is historical, what would be the sources of data? How do I go about? Because it's not very easy to do historical research, because you really have to look it for the right archivists to get the data. And archivists, that are not present everywhere. It's generally maybe in a center that's in the center of a state or center of a nation. These kind of things are available. Then how much time do I have for data collection? Is it 1 or 2 or 3 months? Are the respondents accessible for me during that period? How much can I investigate? Because something you should know, that realize that when I'm collecting data, if you have to do surveys, I think you have to invest more, maybe in terms of publishing or printing your questionnaires, or the data tools, printing, visiting. Travel also requires some kind of investment, something like that. But then if you plan to do an experimental study, it is within your own range. If it is within your own institution, then you don't have to invest more. So these are the parameters need to be taken into account before planning your whole complete data collection process. That is the whole pros. And what techniques should I adopt? Because that also, here you need to go back to your personal attributes. Whether am I comfortable in interviewing an educationist? Am I comfortable in conducting observations? Am I comfortable in administering a questionnaire? So these are the things that you need to see. What skills do you have, which you're fluent in or you're equipped with? To some extent, you also need to maintain a balance of this while planning up your data collection. And the lastly is, what is the kind of data I would like to collect? What kind of data I need to collect is, it's because I'll come to the what actually do I mean by kind of data. If you look into the kind of data, it's just something like when you see when you filled up the questionnaire. I'm actually not looking into the chat box at the moment, so because I can't even see the chat box in my. If there are any questions, what I would do is maybe after an hour. So if we 2:30, so maybe around 3:30, I will just glance through the chat box to see if there are any questions, and then I'll try to answer. Okay. Coming back to the kind of data, see, like if you see the data which the questionnaire which I asked you people to fill, you can see that it was very simple. It was just like a tick mark, or of course you didn't have a numbering, but there was a place where you have to tick a particular number, and it's a single response kind. But I have not asked you to type anything, because that's the time. So that kind of data where it's more descriptive, that's kind of qualitative data. But the kind of question that I gave you is more of a quantitative, because the data that emerges from the tool is likely to be in terms of just a number or two, or it could be put into a number or two, that I will tell you. Or sometimes what also, of late, I mean, in the past 10 or a decade or so, you can see that, especially in education also, researchers have gone beyond the positivistic approach, that is only quantitative. They have now tried to integrate both qualitative and quantitative data, basically to add more meaning to the kind of research they are undertaking. This kind of data actually has implications also on the kind of techniques what you're trying to adopt. Techniques would refer to tools, what tools you want to use, because every technique has a particular tool. Basically, it has a tool labeled, and then that also has implications for the kind of data analysis approaches that you would like to adopt for your study, for the research that you're trying to investigate. If you look into the techniques of data collection, if you look in I'm using the word techniques, I've still not gone to the tools. So it is techniques of data collection. There's difference between a technique and a tool. Techniques and approach. A tool is basically, it's an object that you use while adopting that particular technique. So if you actually see, by and large, there may be many techniques, but I'm just looking into some of the common techniques that are generally used for research in social science. One is questioning. Okay, we use questioning. Other one is interview technique. Other one is group discussions, which now is become more formalized, and now it's a lot of researchers, maybe in the field of health, in sociology and anthropology and education, have started using FGDs. FGDs is focus group discussion, which have been now increasingly adopted in the social sciences, especially rural studies also. And observation, of course, you know, observation have always been used mostly if you're trying to study a psychological construct, or maybe even sometime something like social cohesion. You want to see how is the social skills of children. So maybe you are trying to see how do children behave in a group, that's observations. Then you can use an observation technique. And the last one is the test administration. That is, test administration is you administer a test. Details about this I will explain as I proceed with the slides. Coming out to first one is questioning. Questioning, it's a very common method. I think as Aristotle said, I mean, the whole questioning, I think any doubt, I think any child, any small child also, if you see that, even whenever there is a confusion or there is a conflict in their mind, the first thing they do is question. I think it's, I think, genetically framed in human beings to question in order to find answers. So it's like when you, in fact, when you plan your research, you have a lot of questions. You actually, in the format, it says that what are your research questions. So of course, that questioning, it's so I think it's very unconsciously, it's a skill of a researcher to question. So it's very commonly used tool, if you generally say. Another thing, but the tool that is used for using the procedure of technique of questioning is known as a questionnaire by and large. And the advantage of the questionnaire is you can ask, you have a variety choice of questioning methods. That is, the items, the types of questions could be a different kinds. So what are those different types of questions that could be included in a questionnaire in order to, the advantage of having different types of questions in your questionnaire is it breaks the monotony. I mean, the respondents also does not get a little bored of seeing the same type of questions. The moment, even if you look at the question that I had administered to you, all the three, I think all the three were different kind of questions. So it also increases the curiosity of a respondent, and maybe also it also motivates a respondent to give the right answer while answering to a particular question item. So that's an advantage. So always remember, when you develop questionnaires, it's always to have a variety in your questions. Type of question you speak of, by and large, if you look into a questionnaire, there are, it's called close-ended questions, where if you see the questions that I administered to you, they were all close-ended because you didn't have a choice. I had given you a choice, the question to respond. So you had to respond, and the response was restricted and it was limited. So you can see that it was a limited kind of, so even if you had something else to express to me, you could not, because that is one of the disadvantages of a close-ended questions. You can see that a question like, for instance, if you say, would you like to enroll for a master's program in our university? I will say just a yes or no. But maybe a student is very curious to see why he doesn't want to enroll, but he's not permitted to answer on that. But then to add a little more, get more information, if you see, how much are you likely to enroll for a master's program in our university? I'm giving them a little more wider choice, very likely, neutral, unlikely, or very unlikely. But however, when you look at these questions, the close-ended, it doesn't answer many things. Why do you think a person, a respondent, says likely, or why does someone say unlikely? What could be the reason? This goes unanswered in a close-ended question, and maybe they don't add even value to your data. So you're not able to interpret the reason. So that is the reason you would also, I think, prefer to go in with an open-ended question, something like this. Why would you like or dislike to enroll for a master's program in a university? So here actually you come out with, you're trying to get more and more objective. So even it's like, why would someone like or dislike to join for a master's program in the university? So when this is what is the advantage of an open-ended question. But if you see in terms of an advantage of a close-ended question, you can see a close-ended questions is easy to, I showed you how the data comes out, raw data. And when it comes in Excel sheet, it becomes very easy for you to, classify, categorize, analyze, and interpret. But whereas when it comes to an open-ended question, it's more difficult, a tedious procedure, because it's in text. You don't even know whether someone answers in a sentence or maybe in a paragraph, and then you need to again categorize them, it is possible to quantify qualitative, because the data, kind of data that emerges from open-ended questions is going to be qualitative. So, but qualitative data can be quantified. You adopt a coding pattern. Maybe when analysis is done, you'll come to know about it. but it is more time consuming. So that is why I said, when you are trying to decide on your data collection prior to getting the field, you need to decide, do I have the time to collect my data and to analyze my data? So that's when you decide. But it's always advantageous, or I think the value of your research improves or goes to a better level when you have both closed and open-ended questions in your tool that you are trying to use in any kind of research. Coming up to close. Why this is a quantified? I say cross and receive. When I say, would you like to enroll for a master's program in a university? Okay, I give you a choice, yes or no. So what I do is, when you choose yes or no, I code yes or no. I say yes will be 1 and no will be 2. So immediately my Excel sheet will give me how many 1s and how many 2s. So the second close-ended question, how much are you likely to enroll for master's program? You can say likely. I give codes for them. And then immediately I come to know what is the number of people who have said 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then I take out the percentage, and then I come out, okay, what is is there a consensus in the group, in the students group, or is there a deviation? How much is the deviation? And the question is, if there is a deviation and why there is a deviation, I don't have an answer. That is where then you use the open-ended questions. See, that whole same data, if I'm administering to a group of 50 students, I see that, okay, 26 have said 1. I coded them as 1. So 26%. Immediately I come down, okay, 26% said yes, 74 have said no. And the same data, when I quantify and put it, immediately I get it in the bar chart. And I come to know, okay, this is how 40, this is in percentage. It's 40, 20, 12, 20, and 8. So this is the advantages of quantifying data. It's very unfortunate that in education, most likely, there is this whole craze of going towards quantifying data. I think somewhere, I think we miss in social science. It's very important that you have to even use some qualitative data to extrapolate the quantitative data that you have collected. That's more important than, because as human beings, or as in the field of social science, you know that a behavior of a person or a manifestation of children or anyone, many times it depends on a particular context. It could vary after some time also. So many times figures cannot be the only sole source of interpretation of a particular phenomena or an issue or a situation. Coming up to the kinds of advantage, and coming back again, advantage of closed-ended questions. The response restricted, so it's easy to code. You see that it's easy to analyze, it's easy to interpret, it's easy to quantify. Basically, by and large, it's easy to quantify, but does not provide the reason for their response. Hence, sometimes we do not find the true meaning of their response. So this is one of the disadvantages of closed-ended questions. Coming up to open-ended questions, responses are flexible and can be elaborated too. I think it's very important, like if you run a particular program, and then, I mean, for you, you know, it's one of the best programs in the country. It attracts students from all over the world, maybe from different parts of the country. But then when you see that there is a group, there is a 12% or 10% of students who are saying that, okay, I don't think I'm going to join a program. I think that's very important to know that, forget the positive aspect. Why is there a small gap? Why is that a small percentage of children are not willing to enroll for my program? I think that is where you need to investigate more. And that actually maybe it is also reflecting that there is some kind of a loophole or a drawback in your particular program. And it is maybe when you try to investigate that, that would help you to evaluate your program. So that's where open-ended questions are a best way to support the kind of an issue that you're studying. Although one might not be able to quantify directly open-ended question, which I said that you can quantify open-ended as a qualitative data. It provides better insight and meaning to the data. Many times closed-ended questions can lead to open-ended questions. That's something maybe you should also know, that where I said, when you try to use both open-ended and closed-ended, sometimes when I said, okay, would you like to enroll for a course, yes or no, then you can say why yes or why no. So it's again, closed-ended will lead to an open-ended option. Coming to type of closed-ended questions, as you said that there are varieties of ways to construct your questions in your questionnaire. One is the very commonmost one, and it's a basic thing, is a basic form of a question. Items, we generally say them as items, question items that could be incorporated in a questionnaire. It could be a dichotomous. You just have yes or no, true or false, fair and fair. You can ask in terms of gender, yes or okay. That's a kind of a question. But then, if you the other one is a multiple choice. Like for instance, you're asking a child or something. What is the source of travel transport that you use when you go to the school? So you give them a list of vehicles, and then you can ask the child to take the one which he uses currently. That's multiple choice. The third one is rating questions. You can see, and you have also where you try to rate, ask the respondent to rate his perception of a particular issue on or a particular construct on a given scale, or something like a likelihood scale. How likely are you going to join this particular course? How likely are you going to recommend this course to someone else? Or how? This is a likelihood scale. That's a rating of a questionnaire. And also something like satisfactory. How satisfied are you with a particular course that you have completed? The last form, of course, is a checklist where you give a list of items, and then you can ask the respondent to tick. Here, if you see the first three, generally the response for a particular item is just one, but whereas for the checklist, it could be more than one. So you could tick mark more than one particular response that alternatives that you have given in a question item. So these are generally by and large. These are kinds of, apart from the open-ended closed, I mean, this is closed-ended, items that are generally used while constructing a questionnaire. Let me see, okay. Coming up to rating scales now, since I don't want to get into more now of questions and multiple choice questions. Of course, if you multiple choice questions, especially when you're constructing for classroom test, there are a lot of precautions that one needs to take, or maybe advantages is you have to have distractors so that, to mislead the respondent to give the right answers. Especially happens in school test. Teacher may test that you're trying to develop, if you're trying to assess actually the knowledge of a student with respect to a particular subject or content. Coming up to rating scales, I think it's very important to know about rating scale, because rating scales also is actually one step ahead of a dichotomous kind of a question, because it gives more clarity on the response on the response made by the individual. Generally, if you look into the literature around in the internet or even the books, they come out with different kinds of rating scales. It's ordinal, nominal, graphical, descriptive. It all I mean, there are even some ready-made scales available also, but if you see that ordinal, apart from ordinal, there's also something called ranking. You give them a list of, for example, teachers, you can give them a list of roles and say, which role do you think is your topmost role, followed second role, third role, can you rank it? That also is that could also come under the ordinal scale, the numerical scale, where you give them a scale, something like from excellent to bad, and then put it on a 5-point scale and say, how would you like to rate yourself in this 5 scale? Which side is it inclined towards excellent, or is it inclined towards poor or something? And that's a numerical scale. A graphical is likely to be more descriptive, where you give descriptions for each sub points also, and then you try to obtain the response of the individual or whom you're trying to administer the question. And descriptive, of course, more detail, like every point in the scale is described. And if you feel that you fall in this particular category, then you try to say, okay, it's generally descriptive kind of scales are generally done where you're trying to measure the efficiency of teachers, whether you're trying to say you're highly efficient, or you're moderately efficient, or you're less efficient. For example, something like a skill of a blackboard, using a blackboard skill. No, sometimes you can also use a rating scale where teacher, okay, put it on a is good or excellent, bad or excellent. But ultimately, you don't have a meaning. What does excellent mean? How does a teacher know she's excellent? You can put that in a very descriptive form. For example, you can say less efficient is, sorry, you can say that the writing clarity is not good, is not legible. The writing is not legible. Something you can say that the writing is less legible, and the complete blackboard is not equally spaced or utilized. That could be a less efficient. Whereas a good efficient one, you can say, okay, so use more colors on the blackboard, more elegant, legible, a student can see from the behind, and generally uses the space of a blackboard, complete space. That could be a proficient teacher. So that's where you describe that. What do you mean by describe? By and moderate is, okay, someone, you try to get descriptors which falls between these two kind of extreme descriptors. So that's kind of a descriptive kind of a rating scale. These are, you have to be very careful when you're trying to develop these kind of tools, because there's a lot of consultation. You have to go back to your secondary data to see, okay, what generally implies by proficient skills, blackboard writing skills, what would they include? And then you need to come out with this range of skills. So that's an exercise which you need to do even prior to developing any kind of a tool. Coming up to, there's another kind of a tool. If you, the earlier tool which I said was, if you see, there's a 5-point scale, and it generally, it doesn't seem to be like, yeah, it also seems, the Likert scale, if you even Google through the internet, it's very commonly used, like something like a satisfactory scale, where very satisfactory, least satisfactory, and then in the center you have a neutral. That's is generally used to even measure attitudes and opinions. Basically, if you want to check someone has a positive attitude or a negative attitude, so it's the negative side gets a negative rating, and the right side of the positive side of the scale gets a positive rating. So that Likert scale is generally used, and they generally have, you can have a 5-point or a 7-point Likert scale, depends upon how wide you want to have the variation of that particular attitude. So that's how you decide what kind of tool you want, scale you want to use, sorry. So it's something like that, something for agreement, strongly agree to, it could vary from strongly agree to strongly disagree, for frequency, often to never, importance, very important to not important. These all can be put in a Likert scale form on a 5-point or a 5-point or a 7-point form, and then you can go about collecting opinions of respondents on whatever issue that you're trying to select. Okay, let me just see. Okay, we still have some 5-10 minutes. Okay, what you I mean, these are small tips you should know while developing a good rating scale. There's another thing, rating scale need not be only be used in questionnaires. They're largely used also in observation. In fact, they are one of the main tools used. Rating scale as an item is largely used in during when you're conducting observations. But then when you're especially using the rating scales which have descriptors, or when you're trying to define the points in the scale, I think you need to be very clear that those terms have to be very clearly defined. And when you're conducting observations, example, when you're saying effective or proficient, what do you exactly mean by proficient? You need to define something. Where I spoke about blackboard scale, but here I'm speaking about skill of questioning. When you say that teacher is effective while questioning, so these things really need to be, I mean, that really needs some kind of a research exercise which should take place prior to your developing your tool. Another thing is rating should be sound, rational, and good. It should really make a good, has the ability to make a good judgment, because when you say you're trying to identify effective teachers, it should, I mean, maybe somewhere it should not give scope to people to generally, depict themselves to be effective, but is there possibility to see that there is more truth in the rating? I think that is something also you need to take care of. I'll come ahead about something like how do you see that you get valid data from these tools. Another thing is avoid using ambiguous terms. Sometimes a term which may mean something to you may not mean the same for another, the respondent, or maybe another person. So something, a good teacher for you may be good. A good may not be equivalent to an effective teacher, but whereas for a respondent, a good teacher may be equivalent to an effective teacher. So this is a kind of a thing you need to be very careful when you're trying to use terms in your rating scale. So that is the reason actually you always try out your tools with a group of people and to see whether, okay, is it appropriate and does it make again that good judgment. Another thing is, that is what last I said, is ensure that the tool is reliable and valid. I think this two terms of reliable and valid are very important for any social science research, because as human beings, you know that today I may say, today my opinion towards a particular issue may be positive. After 2 days, it might be negative, or it might come a little less. So how is it possible actually to ensure that whatever I'm trying to collect today is most likely to sustain even after some day? That is, if I go after a few days to the person and ask him to fill that same rating scale, I am most likely to get the same ratings that I have got in my earlier administration. So this is something which you need to really be very, and when I say valid means, okay, if I want to measure a particular construct, or if I want to measure something, it should measure that and not something else. Something like, when I'm speaking skill of questioning, then I cannot put interaction indicators in this classroom interaction as an indicator in the skill of questioning. So that's something I think you need to be very avoid. But there is also a procedure how you can ensure that your data can be reliable and valid. There is a systematic procedure which I'll come ahead in my presentation. Coming up to tool administration. Okay, now this whole thing of, okay, you have a tool, you want to go to the field. Okay, questionnaire, when I also said that in the technique of questioning, the kind of tool that you use is a question. But if you remember that a questionnaire, assume that a question is given to the respondent, that time it is called as a question. But there are occasions where you know that the respondent is unable to fill up that questionnaire. You have a printed form and you know you have to fill up. By and large, you're saying that, okay, I'll ask a question, he'll respond and I'll fill up, or I'll give him the questionnaire, he'll fill up. That is what happens when you're trying to collect data from teachers or students. You give the questionnaire to them by hand and they fill up, all right. But there are some times when you realize that you cannot give the questionnaire to the respondent, rather you would ask the question and you would fill up. At that stage, the kind of, you don't say that is a questionnaire, because you're not giving it to the respondent to fill, rather you're filling it by asking the question. It's called a schedule. So that's how you say that. That's the difference between a questionnaire and a schedule. A schedule, basically, it's a tool. It's used when generally the researcher or the administrator itself fills the questionnaire. This is it's the technical glitch which you should just know while in research. If someone asks you what is the difference between those two. Coming up to the situation of, when do you generally, on what occasions do you think that the researcher is likely to fill up the questionnaire? Why do you think that the respondent is not going to fill up the questionnaire? Okay. I thought there was a question after this, but maybe we'll come back to that later on somewhere. Okay, so coming up to administration of a questionnaire. You know that if you're going to field, obviously, it is going to be a face-to-face questionnaire where you sit, you give to the respondent, fill up, or you fill it up. That's one face-to-face. Other one's online, as you have used the one that I had shared with you today. And now, do you know that with the pandemic, it's very difficult. I think this pandemic itself has given us has opened up the complete, us to this new world, a new normal of doing things without facing each other. So you can also use a telephone on in fact, now the kind of research that has been taking place in health or in social science, they are largely using these online and not of course a postal, but online and telephonic, or even maybe through video, whatever it is. I've not put that. Maybe that also should come up. But is it no? Video will not may or may not come. I'm not very sure. But telephonic, of course, you can ask on phones the questions. And of course, postal. Postal used to be some time back. Questionnaires used to be filled up by post. I remember when I was doing my PhD, when I had to get opinion from experts, especially educationists, who could not visit people across, among the other states. So I had to post my questionnaires, and so that was also a technique being used. Of course, other thing about questionnaire is, so far when I'm explaining, you will come to an assumption that generally questionnaires are structured. Okay, all the items in a questionnaire are predetermined, but I think there are occasions when they need not be. It could also be semi-structured. It also depends. I think this largely like to place when when the researcher is filling up, when he's using a schedule, when he can add more questions depending on the response of the individual that he's trying to get it from. So I think that is something you could also see. So you have even an option of having a semi-structured questionnaire, but most likely in a schedule where you try to you add on questions, not matched, but some questions when you're questioning the respondent. Okay, now this is what the question what I wanted to ask is, under what circumstances does the respondent is unable to fill in the questionnaire while the researcher himself or himself fills the questionnaire? Now this is something maybe I would like you to put on a text box. I'll give you a couple of minutes, 2-3 minutes. You can give me the context when that is, when are you likely to use a schedule, that is where the respondent does not fill in the questionnaire but the researcher himself fills up the questionnaire. Just give me 2-3 minutes. I'll just put on the fan. It's getting a little hotter here. Yeah, I would now look in the text box to see what the response is. Yeah, I would like you to put your, okay, yeah, very good. Someone says if the respondent is a minor, yes. If the respondent is illiterate, yes. Physically impaired, absolutely right. Visually impaired, absolutely. Yeah, I think now you're getting the whole thing of when the explanation of question is needed. Okay, that is also fine. Something you'll be very careful, especially when you're trying to say explanation of the questionnaire is needed, because see, it's possible, but it's only that sometimes, you're not administrating question only one response. You're responding to many respondents. So it's quite likely that your explanation might vary from one respondent to another. So there must be some kind of a subjectivity entering into this kind of approach. So you need to be very careful when you're trying to explain, of course, but that is always good to explain. Okay, that's that's good. So pretty well the respondent has not comprehended the question, or in the sense confused or take a disclosure. No, look it from that point of view. Who are the ones who are generally unable to write? That's something. So it could be, one of the best was illiterate, something like when you go to a rural field. Yes. In fact, privacy or self-efficacy would like to speak, forget writing. So that may not be, in fact, I think that would person, if something to do with sensitive issues, a person would like to be unknown. So he would prefer an online kind of a questionnaire than a face-to-face one. Okay. So that pretty good response. Yeah, I agree with a lot of the response that will come up. And that's how I think this is something maybe you also need to foresee when you're trying to collect your, when you're trying to develop or select your tool, is who's going to be my respondent, how efficient is that respondent in answering to the tool that I'm going to give, how is he going to respond to my tool. So these need to be considered when you're trying to do. Okay, well, let me just put it current slide. Okay, that's good. So we go to the next slide. We'll go to the next technique. Okay, before that, I'll stop here. Maybe if there are any questions, let me just look back into the chat box and see if there are any questions. If there are any, if there were, let me check. Yeah. Yeah. Looks like I'm unable to scroll in, but if someone can help me, if there are any.
Yes, ma'am. Actually, there were no questions prior to this.
Okay.
So
I'll go ahead. Okay. Okay, then
yes.
I'll go ahead. Yeah.
Okay.
Then. Okay. Yeah. We'll go to the next question. Interview technique. The situation where two or more individuals interact to exchange information through a series of questions and answers. I think this is again a very common technique. Most of you are aware of it. You have seen it. Many of you have been experienced, have been interviewed. You've seen interviews, it's so common on the TV. I mean, you also know, I've undergone also an interview. And so we all know what it is, an interview. But you should remember, when you're doing it as a research activity, it might take a different turn, or the perspective needs to be a little different. Uh, uh, First of all, of course, you're trying to understand the respondent. That's very common. I mean, it's universal everywhere. In an interview, you're trying to understand the respondent's view, experiences. You're trying to get more in depth, because interview, when you compare to a questionnaire, you can investigate more, get into more in depth information from the respondent, and maybe, as someone said, something like maybe. If you want to get some sensitive topics, I think interview is better more than a questionnaire. That would be better. And generally, if you see that open, by and large, in an interview, when I said when I speak about questionnaire attempts, if you see that in an interview, generally they are open-ended questions are raised in an interview. And but the tool, you should know that interview is a technique. Remember that, and the tool that you use to conduct an interview is called an interview schedule. So that's basically because, so again, the interviewer is the one who writes the responses of the respondent. And another thing is the interview. There are different kinds of interviews. They vary in design and structure depending on the purpose of the interview. Again, if you look at structure, it's a lot of things. Most of you are aware of it, so I'm not getting much into detail. So just to give, it's more like a skeleton view of an overview of a bird's eye view of these tools and techniques. You see a schedule, it could be structured, semi-structured, or unstructured. You know, in a structured, as similar like in your questionnaire, structure means the questions are determined, predetermined. You cannot move any way away from the questions defined in your interview schedule. In semi-structured, of course, it also depends where, okay, you list a set of questions, but you think that it's likely that my question might vary depending on the way the respondent gives an answer. Maybe I would like to investigate, probe in more. So there is going to be scope for some flexibility. Then you can decide for a semi-structured interview. Of course, unstructured is, it's totally like, it's more like an informal kind of an interview where you just have a broad outline of what I'm trying to going to speak about. So, and my questions will emerge there on the spot as the respondent answers to your initial question. So you can see one of the advantages of interview is, you can see there's a variation in the interview methods that you can, schedules that you can prepare. You can, if you want to probe more, you can use semi-structured or unstructured. There is flexibility, so that is that advantage. And of course, in an unstructured, you have a broad outline. A small, this is very something. Interview process, generally there's a preparation, you define the questions, whom do you want to interview, what is the background of the interviewer, you know, this is something also, especially it is very important. See, something that goes on a TV or interview or at a very personal level interview, it's very different from your research, because in your research, when you're trying to interview the respondents, each and every respondent is going to be different, okay? The personality of the respondent is going to be different. And it's not one person interview, most probably. More generally in research, when you're conducting interviews, it could be more than one person, it could be 10, it could be 12, it could be 20. It also depends on the kind of study. For instance, when you're trying to, okay, I want to interview a group of experts, you know. So there's a lot of preparation. You speak to the expert, call the expert first, fix up a time, give him an idea what you want to speak, maybe even share your questionnaire to him. These are the questions I'm going to ask. So it gives time even for the interviewee. The person who interviews is called interviewer, and interview to prepare for the answer. So that's the kind of a preparation. And also maybe you as a researcher should also get an idea of a respondent. For example, if you're trying to interview a group of rural women, I think it's very important. You'll be very careful. Certain topics maybe they would not like to share. So are there any sensitive topics? Do you think something's got to do about health and hygiene? So those questions which are more of sexual orientations, then I think so this is a kind of a preparation you need to take. How do I get the respondent into the flow? How do I sequence the questions? How do I slowly probe into the questions? This is a lot of preparation for a researcher to take up before he undergoes an interview process, especially also keeping in view the nature and profile of the respondent. So, and then when you go in for the interview, introduce maybe to the interview, the who I interview, what is, how long it would take or whatever it is, making comfort, then the rapport building, where you start off with questions which are easy, which are less threatening. That's something maybe you should know. And somewhere where you're getting so you don't immediately go to the core of the issue. Slowly you get into the core of the issue. That's how, for that you need the rapport building. And then is the actual interview process where you start actually getting the real data for your study. And then ultimately is your closure of your interview, where you thank and you summarize. So this is a kind of an interview that, it's interviews have to be really structured. It can't take place very informally, especially in something like this, because you have to, again, you need to go back. You have to get the valid data. That's very important. That's a objective of conducting an interview. We come into the next question. That's next technique. Sorry, it's observation. Observation techniques are usually used when you would like to examine overt behaviors or manifestations of inner tendencies of respondents in real context situations. See, something like skills. Okay, something like social skills. These are overt behaviors. I mean, you see it from expressions like communication abilities. These are expressed. This is overt, but something that is inert. Inert would say something like maybe, what do you say, decision making. Decision makings are something, it requires a process, and when it is manifested in a different form. So other thing maybe something like self-concept also. How does a child feel about himself? Is he positive himself? So these are inert tendencies. Now, in order to see them, actually, you know that they are manifested in different forms. So they are not directly observable. They are in fact observable as certain behaviors which predict those inner tendencies. So observation also needs to be very careful. So generally when you're conducting observation, I think there are a lot of theoretical analysis needs to go, especially when you're trying to observe constructs. Comes even something like social cohesion. How do you define social cohesion? Does it mean social skills? Does you mean gender equality? Social skills, does it mean hierarchy? No, these are the kind of things. Equality, what does it imply? Then you need to define these. Okay, so when you, and also you need to define, if I'm looking at gender equality, then you need to define, you need to look at a context. Which context do you have to see the gender equality? Maybe you can think of a social activity and then see how does that, is it manifested in some form? So this is something very important, is while you're doing observation, is you need to identify the parameters. First of all, the parameters, the construct, the parameters, and then there is the indicators. What indicators should I look about in the field or in when I'm trying to observe the subject? That is how very important in an observation. That's again, you should realize that when you're developing this matrix of an construct and converting them into parameters, and then in terms of indicators, you need to get it validated. Show it to people, show it to experts in that particular field. See whether it's right, get it approved, and that's how then you go ahead. That's all a part of a tool construction, which I'll speak later on. Example, behaviors of children in group situations, there's a cohesion. Nature of participation of individuals in program. When do you observe? What are situations? You can see is something like you're conducting a training program for teachers. So you want to see how are the teachers participating? Are they able to understand what the experts are saying? So that's when you conduct observation. Otherwise, teacher practices in different classroom. That is, what kind of practices a teacher uses in the school classroom. You can see effectiveness of a teacher, whether she's using teaching aids, whether she's using a blackboard, whether how much of social space is she using in the classroom. So these can be generally only directly observed in the classroom. So these are the situations when you have to use observation. Before I go back to this observation, I will go back to and I wanted to ask a question. Okay, unstructured interview. Can you think of what is the situation when would you conduct an unstructured interview? When do you think unstructured interviews are likely to be used? Can you just quickly, I'll just wait for 1 or 2 responses and more. I think we have time, another 40 minutes. But if there are any kind of response, let me see. When do you think? Because I was also looking out for an example. I didn't give gossips, unstructured interview. Okay. Who else? Anyone else? When do you think? What kind of interviews do you think are generally unstructured, where you don't go with a very when there are multiple dimensions? Okay. Political, you know what? Very good. Now, just thought when Professor Sharma wrote about gossips, it reminds me of the Kapil Sharma show. Of course, it is not that. I think is a very unstructured interview. Yeah, I think because most of us have seen. It's exactly not. You can say it's an interview because you see, very uncertain. You don't know where it might go. Also, yes, maybe a road accident and passers by is an interview. Yeah, exactly. Yes, perfect. Something that is very incidental. Yes, media interview. Absolutely good. So I was actually thinking for examples in that moment I couldn't get, but now looks like we are on the right track. Okay, so we'll go back to my next, I'll go back to my presentation. Okay, good. What situation? Oh, sorry, I've gone ahead. Okay, now so this is it. Teaching practices in different classroom contexts. That something is like, okay, what I meant is when do you want to observe a teacher? Sometime maybe in a teacher training program, how do teacher educators develop the necessary skills among the prospective teachers? I think that's a good point. I think we have not observed. I think that is a reason, huge question mark. Even till today, we still don't know what is the best program in India to train and develop teachers for a country, because I mean a different context, because India is so diverse. We have a rural, semi-rural, we have a semi-urban, a tribal context. Every context is different, and the kind of teacher that we require for each of these contexts is different. But do we have an idea what kind of teachers do we need? So that's still an unanswered question. We'll go to the next question, next slide. Okay. Now, coming up to observation, there are two kinds of observations. One is a participant observation and a non-participation. As the term says, participation observation is where you see you are in the activity. You are with the activity. So whatever activity you are observing, you are also a member of that activity. Whereas a non-participation observation is where you are not a member of that activity that you are observing. For instance, if you look into your behaviors of children in group situation, obviously you're seeing social behaviors, social cohesion. So you cannot be a participant observation. So you have to be a non-participant. The second one, nature of participation of individuals in a program. What do you think? Will it be a participant or non-participant observation? Let me look into the chat box. What do you say? What do you say when you're observing a training program? What kind of observer would you like to be? A participant or a non-participant? A participant, yes. Anyone else? Okay. Okay, someone says participant. Okay, someone says judge. Okay, oh, okay. This is what happens when one says non-participant. I would also like that non-participant, because it's very important sometimes to become a non-participant, because that someone said judge. That is where I think you need to, as a researcher, it's very important that many times you don't go into the field. Sometimes, of course, it might come in. When I go ahead, I'll show you what. It's sometimes an advantage when you are not a judge. It's more an advantage when you are a participant, because that's when you come to know the intricacies or the inertness or the the small minute insider. You should go to become an insider. You need to be a participant, so that you know what actually is the internal politics or the internal dynamics taking place in the training book. Good. So that's good. Yeah, I know. By and large, if you say a program evaluation, it becomes immediately evaluation. So evaluation means I am the judge, so I have to be a non-participant. But you should also take the other perspective, that it is also an advantage when you are a participant. Teaching practice in different classroom context, that also that it has to be a non-participant observation. Okay, now we can think of, okay, now what are the other situations do you think you can be a participant observation? quickly look for just one or two answers and then we move ahead. If there are any, let me just see. I fully, yes. Confident mode, you want to be a part, yes, exactly. What kind of situation you want to get into confidence mode? When do you think it's a participant observation? Can you think of example, context, where do you think it has to be a participant? Forget classrooms, forget something else. Okay, confidential mode. Okay, let's see. You know what? If you remember, I told something about being, and to know the inside dynamics, you have to be exactly ingredients of people. Absolutely. To know the inside dynamics of a group activity or an issue or a phenomena, you have to become an insider. That is outsiders are generally not entertained. So only when you're insider, you will get information. And I think that's a very important point where Dr. Gaikwad has written, there are chances of you deviate from the objectives. Exactly. I think that is something, a precaution one must take when you are trying to be a participating observer. And absolutely right. Chances of deviation are more. Grievances of people are more. I will come. What are the examples? And do you know which field studies they largely use participant observations? I think most of you may not would know. When I give my next example is ethnographic studies, where you study the social activities of tribals or ethnic groups. Really, do you know that if you really have to study practices of tribals, you have to be a part of a tribe. I mean, you not be a tribe. That means you have to stay with them, see their practices, what are their social practices, what are their rituals, their traditions. When you go as an outsider, they will not tell you. So you have to stay with them, you have to be with them to really know what I think this is also used in education, especially when you want to go to an ashram school and study the kind of practices, because there in an ashram school, a teacher is not only teaching, it is a teacher doing other activities, looking after children, nursing the children, food, shelter. These are also included as the roles of teachers. So I think that is where being a participant observer is very important, and because you have to stay in that particular context to really understand and get a complete view as a whole. Here, you know what advantage of a participant observation is that you get a complete, it's a holistic view of the situation and the phenomena, which does not happen when you go as an outsider, get data and you come out. So that's a complete, you delink yourself with the context. You're not, so that is how it's very important sometimes to link yourself, associate yourself with the context that you're trying to study. And of course, as I said, the second example is basically, it's important when you're really giving a very good training program and you're very keen to know how the participants in the training program are conceptualizing, understanding, and how whatever themes, maybe it's a very systematic kind of program and you want to see how themes emerge in a program from the group discussion. Then I think very important that you be a part of the group to understand what kind of dialogues that takes place in the training program there, and participant observation becomes very important. Okay, so this is something you should know. If you know that, please remember, I mean, you should know that ethnographic studies are not only done by anthropologists, they're also done by educationists. I was a part of an ethnographic study where I had to stay for a month in a rural village and study a school, a rural school basically. It was actually representing a school. So I had to write from the school begins, what happens in the school till the school closes. From morning 9 o'clock to 5 o'clock, I had to be in the school premises and see what happens in school, how children play, what kind of social spaces are used in the classroom, what is the social space of a teacher, how do a teacher spends a leisure time, what does she do, what activities happen during a prayer time. So this is a kind, and inside the classroom, how do children interact, recess, what do children do. So this is what happens is and in that study, when I was staying for a month in school, I was also teaching, because so that children don't look me as an outsider. They think, okay, she's also come as a teacher, so she's a part of the system. So you become a part of a unit. So they accept you, and there is no consciousness. So they know, okay, she's a regular visitor, and so she's a part of us. So there is that inhibition is broken. So you break that eyes of, a foreigner in the system. So that's a advantage of doing participatory observations. Okay, the tool that you, as I said earlier, in an observation is an observation schedule. And as you said, you can collect both qualitative and quantitative data in an observation schedule. It also depends on the kind of tool. As I said, rating schools are very prominently used in observations, but you could also get descriptive notes, especially something like an anthropology study, ethnographic studies. You don't use a tool. It is generally a very qualitative study. You describe everything that has happened that day. You maintain a diary and you write what has happened in the school. So that's of completely qualitative data. So you can see an observation. That's why you can see qualitative generally are unstructured by and large. You can also have a structured when generally you're trying to use more of a dating skill. So this is a kind of a schedule, but you have to have a schedule. Even when you do even something like ethnography studies, I think they have a diary book. So they also know certain parameters are defined, okay, what you need to observe. So there is some kind of an, actually, we do not say unstructured, we could also semi-structured. Yeah, by and large, I think you should say unstructured, but the parameters are defined, what you need to observe. This is how it is. When you say a schedule, when you say structured, that means what is the kind of thing you're using? You're using a rating scale, checklist. How do you think that you can, what can you, assuming that you're observing something, what will you use? When will you use a checklist? Where descriptors are used, and you can rate a teacher, or measure a teacher's ability based on the. Another one is unstructured, where field notes, anecdotes, record David. Okay, before I go back to you, as you know, field notes is nothing but you have a notes, the open field notes. Anecdotes is, it's very important when you have when you do a participation observation, and when you're trying to do ethnographic studies, you have small anecdotes. Anecdotes is there are certain small incidences that take place which really have drawn your attention and which you think has to do something with the phenomena that you're trying to study. These are very important anecdotes. Okay, and of course, you unstructured journals are being recorded. Okay, so and for instance, I'll tell you, when I was doing this, someone's, I think, mic is on. Okay, for instance, 4, so we have half an hour. I think I have another 7, 8 slides. Okay, anecdote I'll remember is when this ethnography study which I was doing in one of the rural villages in Maharashtra, I noticed that there was a day when a truck comes out of the rural school and puts a huge heap of sand out of the school. The moment I've noticed that the sand was put just outside the gate, and I realized that as soon as the sand comes, whenever there's a recess period, the children go run on the sand and play on the sand. They're jumping and doing dirty themselves, everything. But the whole point is that you can see that there is an external object. That the whole analysis, what I'm trying to do is there is use of social space. Generally, we assume that social space is within the parameters of a school, that is in the fence of a school. Of course, in the rural areas, as you know, that okay, there is no fence, there is no differentiation between a school and a village. It's all merged. But here, when there was a heap of a sand, that was enough to distract the children. You won't believe, even after the bell rings, the children did not go back to the classroom, but they preferred playing on the sand. So you should, and I was just thinking, if that same piece of sand was within the classroom, that would have been different, or within the school premises. So that was an anecdote to give. It basically gave a message. We should also try to build spaces which are friendly for children. That is, children like pieces. I mean, they like places with sand. So the moment you have sand, children, there is some kind of barrier that breaks and they play. So this is how an anecdotes also come into here. Before I go back to the There was someone put a question I saw on the chat. Someone said about ethnography. Do ethnography require research diary? Yes, as you say, Khan, Saira said. Does it require a performance criteria? No. Ethnography, remember one thing, when you're doing an ethnography study, as I said, it is unstructured. By and large, it's very important. That is what I will also say, that it's very important for a researcher sometimes to go without judgments. You do not go with the performance criteria. The criteria emerges after you complete your data collection, that is from the field data, comes out with the criteria, or it comes out with a trend. That's how generally in ethnographic studies are. And it's very important for a ethnographer or a study person to study is, when you go with a blank slate, you go without any expectations, without judgments. You get the data, study the data as it is, and then the data evolves into some kind of a trend, and then your criteria or whatever you try to conclude. Yes, anecdotes are detailed. Anecdotes are mostly small incidents which you're trying to describe. That's what you mean by anecdote. To see everything is done, checklist to ensure consistent rubric is was okay. Heterogeneous cases for what? Is it that for participant observation? Okay, fine. Okay, now we'll go ahead. Now coming up to this rating scale. Okay, so you can see a rating scale. Why did I put this? Okay, this is to show how do you use a structured observation. Okay, for example, a teacher language skills you're trying to measure, you rate, you see, that is what I said, you need to come out with parameters, communication, clarity, audibility, non-verbal cues, and then you rate it on those parameters. Something like a checklist, I said, no, a teaching support, teach what kind of support material a teacher is using. Blackboard take, textbook take, pictures take, chart take, models, no, that's how you do a checklist. And then if you look at this is the rubric, which I said is developing a rubric is not easy. Remember that. That's again a systematic process to develop rubric. Something like, when you're trying to rate a performance of it, because they feel that something like a rating scale is not appropriate. It does not give communication. What do you mean by communication? Do you mean speed of communication? Do you mean clarity of words? Do you mean appropriateness of words? So that when you describe that, you put that in the rubric, and that's how you put them as good, excellent, good, satisfactory, and needs improvement. In fact, I think rubrics are less threatening than rating scales. I think this is something maybe we should learn to use rubrics more compared to rating, because rating scale, the figures that attracts us more. When you look at a rubric, it's more softening. Okay, it's something describing. So do I fit in this description? Does someone fit in this description? And that's a more a softer way of assessing or what do you mean? Rating and subject. We'll come next. Okay, the last, next other technique which is called, I said about is focus group discussion. Extensively in the recent years, if you see a focus discussion is extensively used in social sciences. I think because now we've slowly realized that it's only not adopting a positivistic approach. It's only a quantitative method. I think we also need to use more of qualitative data, and for that maybe you need to get more interactive with your respondent, and to get more value or more get in-depth information, use focus group discussion. And focus groups, in fact, when large data is collected through surveys, most of these surveys, it's just numbers. You don't know what actually are they trying to convey to social scientists sometimes. So that is why I think you need to, these are supplemented with more of focus group discussion, which again add value to the survey data. That is, understand the reasons for the nature of trend. Yeah, obviously, when that certain trend is noticed through surveys, you are not understanding what could be the cause for such a trend. Why is that a high negative attitude towards this particular scheme? So what is the reason? So that way you can go to a group of people and conduct a discussion, find out what could be the reason. It gives more meanings. And then when you conduct a focus group discussion, by and large, they say that it should be on an average 8 to 12 members, because you need to manage a small group. It gets difficult when you have a larger. Sorry, my photo has only 4 people, but generally it's better to have 8 to 12 members. And then in a focus group discussion, you have a facilitator, the one who generally conducts the focus group, or is also known as a moderator. And as I said, it had add values to survey findings. Okay. What situations, okay, focus group, I was supposed to ask you this question, but anyway, but you should very remember something. Focus group discussions are also mostly used when you're trying to deal with culturally sensitive topics, something like health, especially women's health, reproductive health. A single woman would not like to answer to a question. They would rather be more comfortable when they are in a group. Sometimes traditions, something like child marriage, individual lady would not like to answer. Maybe a group of ladies would like to, and something like dowry. And the whole depth is to know that it is it is the advantage of a qualitative data that you get through this method. And another thing is, I'm speaking of something cultural sensitive. I think this is very important for as a researcher in social science, is to be cultural. You remember someone said, I through a chat, and I'm again recalling the chats what I've been seeing through. Someone said, can we go with a performance criteria? That is one. Okay, can you go with the criteria of the field? Two, something like I asked, when can you be a participant or non-participant? Someone said to judge, when you want judging. So remember, when you try to become culturally sensitive, you do not take these what do you say, parameters with you. You do not go with any criteria. You do not go as a judge. You have to become, it's very important for you to be empathetic. Even, this need not be only with rural women or rural people. It has to be even with children whom we are trying to study. It is very important that we have to be very sensitive to the emotions of a child, expressions of a child. Maybe even if he does an expression which is not acceptable to us, I think one should not show that. It's so that thing of being culturally sensitive is very important for a researcher and in general as a whole, and for every researcher in social science. Especially it happens because it's generally research we see, or PhD holders or any research program is generally being offered by students who are in the urban area. So, and there's always that, it's a romantic feeling to, go to the rural, go to the tribes, go study them. It's always that, we carry our own assumptions, our opinions about tribes, and then it's always that there is that alienation always there, that because we are unaware, and also there is that feeling that we are better than them. I think that needs to be minimized, or you need to remove that. In fact, you need to try to develop the empathy factor when you get into the field. And for that, in order to become culturally sensitive, is very important. You have to know the geographic, the economic, the socio-cultural, what do you say, the dynamics of that particular context or respondents that you're trying to study. Okay, so you have to understand, that is, you have to derive that complete knowledge, have complete knowledge of the geographic, economic, and socio-cultural what do you say, socio-cultural practices of the group that you're trying to study. So this is very important for any researcher in social sciences. And as you know, something like when you are in a place like when Bahai Academy, where it is a very socially sensitive kind of an organization, and which respects social sensitivity, I think it's very important for you also to become, I'm basically trying to just sensitize researchers to different social sciences. Coming up next focus group discussion, as you know, preparation, broadly you come out with questions, what I need to ask, where do I conduct focus group, something like rural children, rural women, where would they like, under or below a tree? They would not like where there are male members more, so they would like where the females are more. So something away from the since India mostly is a patriarchal society, so they would like to be away, being dominated by the male, so they would like somewhere more aloof. So that's, you need to prepare, then identify, and then who should be a respondent. So you also need to select respondents who are spread across, it's not only from one particular area, you get people from different strata, different caste, different class, identify the respondents. Then how do you start? Same thing like interview, rapport building, you start with simple questions, then get into the core of the problem, and then it's the summarization. The another thing of focus group is that you need to ensure that all the respondents are given opportunity to speak. It is not dominated by one person. Even if one person dominates, it's up to the part of the researcher to ensure that he intentionally ask the ones who are not responding to also give their feedback on the thing. So this is how focus group. It's a fantastic method. Of course, the only trouble of this is particular technique is writing down. So I rather suggest if you have a recorder, record it and then look back through the videos and then make notes. It's or you can always have a moderator with you who is noting down how do people. But so one of the best way to get the opinions of women, especially the group or the class of people who are suppressed in the society. I think focus group is the best method to collect data from them than the normal interview or questionnaire method. Topic for okay, HOD. Can you identify a topic or issue appropriate for FGD and who are the respondents? Quickly, we'll have it on the chat. I just have a couple of now slides. I should get to. Yeah, I would like to see what kind of topics would you suggest that are best for having a focus group discussion, and who could be the, forget rural women. Do you think of something else? Can you think of something else that you could, yeah, let us see. Yeah, we did observations, good, yeah. How to observe is to talk, what is to talk, yeah. How to observe is to talk, what he talks, still bit psycho-political sentences. Yeah, can you think of any young girls? Yes, that's one, exactly. What else? Can you think of FGDs? Where do you think you need to break that barrier and these topics cannot be got single-handedly? It would come out more when they are. What about school children? Can you think of something? Cooperative learning techniques, study habits. No, but the question of study habits is it's more of an individual process. So a student would like to give it individually because unless it is a group activity, that's study habits. Use of mobile, PUBG, a PUBG game, yes, something so. Bullying in the school, exactly. Bullying in the school is very important because they know individuals, it's difficult to tell children that, tell someone, an authority that I've been bullied. Critical thinking among school kids and no, that's a very technical thing, Saira. Critical thing among school kids. Because critical thing is a construct. You need to see in terms of, see, generally focus group decisions are used for issues. Etiquettes, okay. Planning an event in school, colleges, okay. I look at a research issue. A culture stress among adolescents, character building, malnutrition. No, because malnutrition, no. I would rather say no. I would say you should think of, could you please difference between panel discussion and focus group? Panel discussion is more of a very formal way, I think, you know that. And lastly, in a panel discussion, the respondents are experts themselves. So you're trying to get their expertise mostly in a panel discussion. So then they're generally done, maybe you know that it's on TVs, you can see a lot of panel discussions, in webinars you see. But focus descriptions is not done in a reality. It's not done in a reality situation, panel discussion. Focus groups rather are done in the field itself. Addiction, yes, addiction I perfectly. Even something like drugs, maybe a child, smoking. Individually, a child will not tell that I have smoked, but when they're in a group, they'll come. Impartiality in schools, that is something maybe children will not tell alone, that they will tell about. Online learning processes, child trafficking, that's a very difficult thing. And whom do you think, okay, all of you have given me issues. Okay, let's take child trafficking. Who do you think would be the respondent? Who do you think would be the respondent for child trafficking? I think that's a very important, you should know that, while you're thinking of a focus group discussion, do you have respondents and will it be easy for the respondent to reveal information? I think that's something, see, even in children, if you ask something like FGDs about school children, you can ask school children, maybe what do they like or dislike, which is a teacher, which is a subject they like more, which is subject they do not like more. Basically, what practices do they like more in school? It comes out more when they are in a group. So slowly you can see their affiliation towards the teacher or affiliation towards the subject. That so these are the things maybe you should, and students are better. Then you can also differentiate between boys and girls. So the girls have a different affiliation, the boys have a different affiliation. Okay, so that's okay. Now we'll go to the next slide. Testing. That's the last thing. We just have another 20 minutes. Okay. Testing is, testing is very widely used in the field of education. It's very common. I am a little very unhappy when testing is largely used by MEd and largely MEd and MPhil students for testing. Their teacher may test, they use psychological. I sometimes feel that these things limit your understanding, limit your perceptions about the field, because ultimately you are trying to limit your whole understanding to the test itself, not beyond that. But still, of course, to some extent it is fine, but then there is because I think the time is less for students, so they prefer to use tests than to develop a tool. Okay, that too, generally we say there are two kinds of tests: the teacher may test and psychological tests. Teacher may tests are generally the one developed by teachers, but you can't use them for research unless they are very systematically prepared. Something like if you're trying to develop a science achievement test or a social science achievement test or a maths achievement test, a teacher made one is different, but when you're trying to use it in a research, you need to ensure that it's more objective, it's proper in its scope, and there's no biases, whatever. And psychological tests, if you take up psychological tests also, if you know that researchers cannot develop psychological tests. By and large, there are tests, I mean, they are standardized tests. I mean, they are ready, they are available on purchase. A lot of agencies, offer selling psychological tests, and basically psychological tests. If you take the teacher made test, they measure by and large knowledge dimension, but a psychological test, they measure your psychological dimensions, that is especially manifestations of your inner behaviors. That something like see the thing, why do we say manifestations? Because you cannot directly measure them. Something like height, weight, length, which you can measure directly, but psychological, they are reflected in different forms through their behaviors. Something like aptitude, attitude, motivation, and personality traits. This I've also spoke earlier. And to say there's a very system, as I said, development of psychological tests has a very rigid procedure, it's a systematic procedure, and it's called standardization. That whole process is called standardization, and that is why they say as they are standardized tests. Okay, standardized tests, and the procedure adopted is called standardized procedures. What exactly do you mean by standardization? It's very see, even if you're not using a psychological test, remember as researchers, even the tools that you're trying to develop for your research, it could be a questionnaire or an interview or a rating scale or even oh, I forgot to say, in an FGD, focus group discussion, you prepare a schedule. Just like since the questions are prepared, there's always a schedule prepared prior to conducting a poll. Even those tools that you use for all those techniques that I mentioned, observation, they have to be standardized. Standardized to some extent, they need to be formalized. In the sense, you have to ensure that what you're trying to measure, you're objectively measuring. Okay, that is because when I speak of psychological tests, when I said that it undergoes a vigorous process, that particular tool, standardized psychological test, is being already tried out. It's tried out on a small group, and then it is shown that that particular test can be used for a larger population. That is, a sample data is interpreted, and that whatever, if you know that in research, we generally don't take a population, the data from the population, because it is impossible to collect the data from the population. We generally collect data from a sample. And as you know, you must have learned already what is the different ways of sampling and choosing a representative sample of a population. So when you are standardizing a tool, especially psychological test, it is tested that it is appropriate for that particular population. And that is the reason it is also said to be unbiased. It is also again said to be culturally sensitive. If again, I'm coming back to sensitive. If you look into the psychological test, every psychological test, when you have a test, they also come out with a blueprint, that is scores, because that particular test has some scores. So for example, if you have a range 50 marks per score, it will say that okay, if it is girls, then they have to score in between this range. If it's boys, they have to score in this range. And it almost say, it would also say, okay, for rural children, it has to be of this range, for urban this range, for tribal this range. boys and girls. This is what we meant by norms. They develop norms for the test scores. I'll tell you example for norms. What do you mean by norms? For example, I have, assuming that I have developed a self-concept test, okay? I have gone through all the procedure of standardization. I develop test items. I show it to experts. I see that it's reliable, it's valid, and then I retest, use it on a pilot small group, then try to measure it. And I realized, okay, now this test is useful for a population. But then ultimately, I should also say that since it's a very diverse, in India at least, if you see, it's a diverse population with a lot of variation. I I feel that the self concept score largely, since if it's a patriarchal society in India, like it is quite likely that the self concept of boys are likely to be more when compared to girls. Okay. Similarly, the self concept of urbans is likely to be more in terms of rural, semi-urban also, or a tribal. So that means within a rural group, the higher self concept is different, whereas within an urban higher self concept is different. So it's important that you develop different norms for these different groups, and this generally a psychological test gives those norms. So whenever you choose a test, you also need to see, does that test have norms? Sometimes it doesn't have, because sometimes they say it's culturally insensitive, so they have their own reasons. I think that is something you need to go into depending on the kind of study you're undertaking. And if you feel that this whatever variable I'm trying to study might differ in a rural, urban, or a male and a female kind of a respondent. So this is how it is. If you see that for a male, I would say that the self concept uh, actually highest will be 8 to 10, but for as a girls, I don't need that to be high. It could be 7 to 10. Similarly, for rural, it could be 6, because you it's quite likely that you might not find more than 6 or 7 grade in a rural group. So that is the kind of we mean by culture sensitive test. Qualitative studies, ethnographic, yeah, this is that whole thing of culturally sensitive and speaking, which I spoke to you in ethnographic studies. You have to keep your biases and assumption aside. Okay, we go to the next slide. Okay, now we'll again go to a very small exercise. I would request Sally to put the second link on the chat box. It's the same questionnaire. I would like you to please fill in that questionnaire quickly. In the meantime, I look into the chat box. If there are any questions, I will answer those questions. Career issues in Bollywood. I know, I think, Priya, I can understand the kind of media news that we are having. Okay, let's see. Very scholar. Okay, no. Then child trafficking in FEG. Yeah, yeah, child trafficking, I fully agree, but whom are you going to ask questions to? Who's going to respond? Whom do you think would be the right people to ask to participate in FGDs? Yeah, quickly, if you finish answering your questions, put done. In the meantime, let me see if I can also. Yeah, once if you're done, let me just just message on the chat box. In the meantime, I'm just trying to assimilate your response because I can see only 13 responses, 14. At least I'm waiting for some 20, 25 since we have almost 32 participants, or okay, let's say around 32. Yeah, I think at least I need 25 responses to that, because if you can see that the first questionnaire and the second questionnaire are same. Okay, it's basically now to come to the next topic. What I'm going to speak, teach, share with you is trying to derive some meaning from the data that I'm going to collect now. Looks like responses. I'll wait still for some time for more responses to come, and then I will. Let's see. Yes. In the meantime, let me see what is the slide that I have. Okay, are we done? Should I go ahead or should I wait for a couple more? Okay, so now I'll let's see what the time for. Okay, we just have 10 more minutes. So before that, let me just go back to the presentation. Okay, what is happening? Okay. When I said about, if you are coming back to what I have been repeatedly saying, that while constructing your tool, you have to ensure that it's valid. Okay, valid. You're trying to measure what you really want to measure. Sometimes what happens when you're developing a social science test, achievement test, you likely to sometimes include a history question or a civics question or maybe a science question. I think that may be wrong. So that's where you need to see what is your knowledge dimension. Something like NEP policy 2020. A lot of people now, if you know that institutions across the country are conducting an NEP awareness test for people, asking them to participate, and then they give them a certificate. So now when you say, okay, NEP 2020, okay, so now that would mean that the parameters have to be within NEP 2020. Sometimes what has happened, someone may think they'll put questions beyond NEP 2020. That means it is not actually trying, that particular test is not measuring what actually it's supposed to measure. So that's where again you question the validity. So such kinds of tests, you say, are not completely valid. How do you actually ascertain the validity? Content validity, generally by and large, you give them to experts. You show it to 3, 4, 5 people. Show them that, see, this is the objective of my test and these are the parameters supposed to measuring. Can you please check whether it actually measures what I'm trying to measure? That's one way. Second one is construct psychological variables, something even like cohesion values. If you want to say social values, how do I say that, okay, my test actually is measuring social values and not discrimination or not social discrimination. So this is something for this also again construct, you need to again go back to first theoretical base, you need to go back to theories, you need to also then show back to experts, psychological experts in that particular, who's an expert in social cohesion, show him the tool, ask them, maybe then you give them a rating scale and tell how would you rate this particular item. Every item needs to be rated to get the to check whether every, so that is how very important in any tool is, every item needs to be checked whether it is valid. Other is concurrent, is a concurrent validity, is when you have two tests which are generally trying to measure the same. For example, I use the same test, same tool both times, but another person could use another tool. So example, before the training you use one achievement test and after the training you use another achievement test, saying that but they are measuring the same thing at the same level. For that again you need to show it to or also you could also do a pilot study, take the scores and show that the scores are same. Okay, that's again reliability. Sorry, coming up to reliability, that's another indicator is reliability. Is your test retest reliability. You like for example, I give you a test now. Before I started the session, I gave you a questionnaire. The same questionnaire I'm giving you now again. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to see whether the response is same in the two questionnaires. Okay, that is on the example of test retest. If it is same, then it shows that my questionnaire, what I have administered today, is reliable. I mean, that is after 2 days also, if I administer the test to you, to this group of participants, they will give me the same response. So that means you can rely on my tool. Similarly, split off method, generally what do the split off is generally used in achievement test. In, for example, for science achievement test or maths achievement, where you have 20 items, they split off either alternative questions or 1 to 10 as one, and other rest 11 to 20 as another group. that administer it and see that the scores are similar in both the halves. In other words, the difficulty level of the items are the same. That's also, actually, I've not come into the difficulty value. I think that's getting too complex. It needs maybe some, as you are trying to choose your tool, you will come to know. Inter-rater is, for example, tools like rating, especially in observations. Okay, as a researcher, you are the one observing the subject or the group of subjects, and you are using the tool. But to ensure that you are not subjective or you do not, what you could do is you also observe, you also ask another person to observe the group of subjects or the subject, and then compare your ratings with the other observer, and then see if the two ratings are same, then you can say that the tool that you're using is reliable. That is, even if I don't observe, someone else also will observe. He will give the same rating as I gives a rating. Of course, there is also a component of subjectivity. That is also a drawback. As you know, I have not spoken about drawbacks of a rating scale. So that actually is a drawback of rating scale, where you have a tendency either to generally say middle score को ज़्यादा दे देते हैं, or some people are too strict, so they'll always give the lowest score, or some people are too lenient, they always give the highest score. But these are all the drawbacks of a rating scale. But that is where I say that sometimes you need to use descriptors. So descriptors become very, they also validate that okay, the rating is according to the descriptor. Otherwise, equivalent to parallel, again same, when you have two tools and the same tools measure the same ability, and interconsistency, I think is in a particular tool, you're trying to see whether there is interconsistency within the items. Actually, there it has also got to do with the difficulty level, and there are other what do you say, indicators, which I don't want to get into now because I'm going to confuse most of you. We'll go to the next slide because we okay. Now, before I start collating your responses, now I want you to do this small exercise. The one that questionnaire I gave it to you, it had 3 questions. Quickly message me what are the 3 types of questions. What type of question type are they? Just type them and put it in the chat box. In the meantime, I'll collate your responses that and come back to what I just shared with you now. Yeah, you just have to write down what kind of questions they are. Let me just see if I can. Meantime. I'm just trying to see. Okay, let me just check the chat box. We just 4:30, other 2-3 minutes. Oh yeah, okay. Rating scale, absolutely. Close-ended question. Yes, one is multiple choice, and the third one is I actually don't remember now. What is the third kind of question? Yes, checklist. Absolutely right. I think Shairi has read correct. Multiple choice and rating scale check. Absolutely. Okay, now we'll go ahead. Now what I'll do is I'll try to share you now the slide. I actually want to share the responses made by you. Let me share, stop share, and I want to share this particular slide. What is the word slide? It won't take line and then, okay, 6. Share screen. Okay. Sharing now. Yeah. Can you see the document? Word document? Yeah.
Yes, madam. Yes.
Okay. Okay. Now let's take your first response. What was the electronic device you are using to attend the workshop? If you see a 50% say smartphone, 10% said desktop, and 35% said laptop. Okay. The same question when I asked here, you see here 47.578 said smartphone, and there was another 43.5 said laptop. Okay. 35 and you see 43.5. Did you see that there are a lot of difference in this response? It is the same questionnaire, the same question, but the response is different. So you can see that the response that I got in my questionnaire is not reliable. So that shows you cannot depend on this tool because the response is likely to vary. So that would show that this tool is not appropriate. That is somewhere the time limit, or the time also is very less what I've taken. Coming up to the second item, if you look up, how satisfied are you while using the current electronic devices? Someone said, no, I don't know what number is what. Okay, one says 9, 39, 34, 4, 13, and 8. Okay. And the same question when I asked here, what was the number first I said? I forgot. 98132. 98132. Here it is 86321. You see, again, there's a difference. So that again shows that the score, let's take it as scores. Okay, it's a response with scores, obviously. Scores are not the same. So that would mean that it doesn't, you cannot, this is not highly reliable. Okay. Say something, it says some issue with the particular item. I don't know. Next, third one. What are the electronic devices you have access to? Desktop 8, I'm taking the frequency, I'm not taking percentage at the moment. It's easy to remember that. 8, 16, 5, and 18. 8, 16, 5, and 18. Let's stay here. 11, 15, 6, and 16. Okay. So somewhere, okay, this is okay. Somewhere you can see there is a coherence. So this is what we mean by something like, I'm stopping and coming back to my presentation. So this is what that actually in a very rough sense would mean by what we mean by a reliability and validity. Of course, now coming up to validity. Okay, now let's go to a really quickly. So look at this question. How satisfied are you while using the current electronic device? It says very good or very poor. Is there a problem with this particular question? Can someone respond? Or do you think it could have been framed better? What do you think about this particular question? That is item number 2. Better? Yeah. In what way better do you think so? Yes, yes. Absolutely better, but what way? What is missing? What is wrong? Frame. 5 should be very good. Okay. Anything else? I want another response. I'm looking for something else. Look at again the thing. Excellent. No, it's not excellent, Sarah. See, it says, how satisfied are you while using the current electronic device? Well, very good, very good. Do you think there's a better option to give for satisfaction? What do you say? You could always put another term for the rating term. What do you think could be used? Sad, excellent, exactly. Yeah, you could have said very poor. I would rather say, okay, it could have been framed maybe also as satisfactory, very satisfactory, less satisfactory, or whatever. Okay, got it. So sometimes you can that also shows validity. Actually, very good is actually performance. You generally give it for performance when you're trying to assess someone's performance. But when you're saying this is satisfactory, it's a different thing. So that whole, these terms that you use, you think that the rating scale is not actually trying to measure what the question is asking. So this is where it's a very crude example. Maybe I could have come with a better example to explain validity. But this is something which I want to say that, okay, that means this item is not actually very valid. Exactly. Maybe if you put a word satisfactory, of course we cannot measure satisfaction. Satisfaction is not measured, but it's always an opinion. So it could always be an opinion. Okay. It's always manifested as your choice. Okay, now, so I could, now we come to the end of the session. So this is an activity, I'm sorry. I generally don't like to give tasks to students, but I've been asked to give a task, but it should be easier one. So it's, assuming you're planning to study or understand what is an issue related to social cohesion, that is, what is the role of education in facilitating social cohesion, you can take that, or you can take an issue, impact of education on building social cohesion among students, which you know is an issue which really we need in the country today, is developing social cohesion, and why do you think it's important? If you're trying to study something like this, what is, yes, okay, if you can make down, of course I'll be sharing my PPT, so even if you miss this out, you can just note down, or when they share my PPT, you can see what is, these are the questions. Who would you choose to select as your respondent and why? What technique and tool would you like to adopt? Okay, list at least 5 items in the tool you would like to include. Okay, it's just that. Who would, like, if you want to study cohesion, social cohesion in the country, whom would you like to choose? Would you like to choose parents? Would you like to teachers? Would you like to students? Or you like general public, youth? That is one. Just giving, you just have to need to brainstorm yourself and think what would you like. And of course, what technique or tool would you like? That also, again, you need to look into your own capacities, and then just select a tool, a technique and a tool. And for that, if I'm going to use this tool, these are going to be my 5 items. It could be a rating scale, or it could be a question, open-ended, close-ended, whatever it is. Okay, and so that's the end of a session, but looks like there are no questions. It's fine for me. Do we have to keep it open for a question, Siley? No?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you so much for this wonderful session, first of all. And
Yeah.
I'm sure all the participants have gained deeper knowledge about tools and techniques of data collection. And thank you so much also for sharing this PPT so that we can share it with everybody, all the
Yeah.
participants. Ma'am,
Yeah.
actually, earlier there were 2 questions which we can answer. There are
Okay.
no other questions right now. I'll just scroll up and try to get those questions. One was with regards to observation technique, actually.
Hmm.
So I'll just try and get the question back again. Yes, how to maintain objectivity in observation. This has been asked by Mr. Litton.
Hmm.
This
Okay.
is
How do you maintain objectivity in observation is, that is what I said. Is rather than having a rating scale, you should have a descriptor scale. That would be help, because that will help you also to avoid generally see the numbers and put. Other one is to have maybe 2 observers. That is also important. Rather than having 1 observer, you can have 2 observers to check objectivity. But more, I think have being objective is also depends how much of an exercise the researcher himself or herself has undergone to understand what is he trying to observe. You know, when you define, as I said, while conducting an observation, whatever behavior you're trying to observe, you need to define the parameters and the indicators. Unless they are defined, and when you have descriptors, it will help you to be more objective than subjective, generally to, yeah, that's, I think, descriptors is one, and is to come out with an observation index, that is a define the parameters and indicators, which indicators also actually meant the descriptors while you're, and of course you could also have 2 raters, that would also help you to be, that is, yeah, you can also cross check to check whether reliability, that is one. Then of course parameters are to establish validity also. If you undergo the process of validity and reliability, I think you can go through an objective observation. Another way is also you can record the complete observation, have it recorded with you. When you record, then you can also show it to another person, show the recorded version, and then maybe also check with the ratings are right. Okay. Anything
yes,
else?
wonderful, madam. Thank you so much. Another
Okay.
question was, can a trained person interview the interviewee on your behalf? Madam Kunda has asked this question.
Can a trained person? See, as personally, if you speak to me as a researcher, if I am going to investigate, or if I am studying, I would like to interview. Okay. If you're asking someone else to interview, then I don't know what, I mean, of course, it's impossible. I say because I don't find a reason why you can't interview. Okay, even if someone, you can always have a telephonic interview. It is always possible, because it all depends how much are you trying to develop a rapport with the interviewee, because it's very important. And you should also remember that when you're trying to use a trainer, you could do it. I know there are people who have been doing, especially to collect data and research, especially when it's large scale of data, when you're trying to cover more than one states. Of course you can train. If it is not within your hands, I wouldn't say anything. But if I would say, if it is possible for you, I think you should do it. If it is not, of course, then you should, but then you should really train them very well. And when you're conducting such kind of interviews, have descriptive notes, so that you, as a researcher, you could also cross check the notes to check that the interview has interpreted rightly, or maybe try to get the descriptive well, another, as I said, in observation, have the recordings. I think that is also important. Yeah.
Thank you so much, madam. And friends, if there are any more questions, we can discuss it between the question hours also, between 6 to 7. So thank you, madam, once again for this wonderful session on behalf of all the participants. Once again, this is a very knowledgeable session. And as you can see, all thank you notes have started coming in the chat box. So thank you so much.
Yeah. Thank you so much. And I really thank for being very participative. I was little actually very uncertain whether I will be able to navigate between the chat box and my Google Forms and this, but yeah, but then thank you so much, and thank you for being
really
very humble and patient. Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Bahai Academy and SPPU. Yeah.
Dr. Jyoti.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for very nice slides and interactive session.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Thank you for giving me an opportunity. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yes, so dear participants, the session, we will conclude the session now. As some of you have already started writing your names, kindly put your names as attendance. And